Well, let's have a big round of applause. So I guess the first place we have to start is, you guys decide to make this film. Where did this come out of?
Yeah, so it's very roughly kind of based on my own personal story. I kind of became really enthralled and kind of fell in love with the kind of traditional kind of Zionist pro-Israel narrative as a young person, and then was exposed to Palestinian narratives by a teacher of mine in high school, who just gave me a bunch of Palestinian history books and histories by left-wing Israeli authors, and my eyes were opened in a pretty profound way. When I got to college, I saw these young people kind of come to campus thinking that it was truly their mission on earth to defend Israel at all costs, but they had virtually no idea of anything about Palestinian narratives, and just seeing what would happen to them when they came into contact with Palestinians, either at lectures or through courses or at different events on campus, seeing their eyes open and seeing their identities shake and seeing their identities fundamentally change. And sometimes it would take weeks, sometimes it would take months. Some of the most kind of gung-ho pro-Israel folks that I knew in college, it took them 10 years. But to their credit, most of the people that I know who kind of supported Israel unconditionally in college now mostly do pro-Palestinian rights work. And so seeing that transformation occur, both within my own life as well as kind of on a mass scale amongst young people, made me realize that this was a really fascinating and interesting story. As well as just a wild story about suburban American kids joining foreign militaries and being complicit in apartheid, which I don't think we often think about that when we think about American Jews joining the military, but I think that's what it is. So we realized it was a very interesting and potentially compelling story, and here we are. It took us 7 years, but we're here now.
So how did you get involved in this?
Eric called me and said, I have an interview with Noam Chomsky. Can you help me film it?
Hey, I would go for that.
Yeah. No, I had also always found the topic really fascinating, and was looking for, I've been working as a filmmaker mostly on narrative projects and doing cinematography and editing and stuff. I was looking for something with a little bit more of a social meaning, you could say, and this project was one of the first opportunities that came along for that. So, yeah.
So how did you find the subjects for the film? How did you talk them into it?
Yeah, as you've noticed, there are a lot of people interviewed for this film. There are also at least 50 people we interviewed who didn't make the cut. So we kind of just started not exactly knowing what the story would be and just kind of casting a really wide net, and just kind of would reach out to a lot of people and who we read things about them or they had wrote about Israel and Palestine and American Jews, and we're just like, hey, we're making a documentary about American Jews' relationship to Israel. Do you want to talk about that? And a lot of people say yes to that. Even people who might not fully agree with some of the points we make in the film. And in terms of the main characters, like Simone, I think we were familiar with her work with If Not Now, which is the organization that she started, where you saw a lot of protest footage by them. And so we kind of reached out to her and some of the other co-founders of that organization and interviewed all of them, and just kind of felt like she was really compelling on camera and spoke really well. And so we kind of decided to focus in on her. And then Eitan I actually met at a Breaking the Silence, which is an organization of veterans of the Israeli army speaking out about human rights abuses that they saw during their service. They were doing a tour of American veterans of the Israeli military, and so I went to one of those events and spoke with him there, and that was how we got to meet him. So,
and that's to me the most compelling of all the arguments is the soldiers who were there and talk about what they saw. It has a different kind of resonance than what other people are saying. It's just so incredibly powerful. So a lot of people agreed to be in there and sign these before they knew what it was really about.
So it's interesting. We were interested in interviewing folks from across the political spectrum. My favorite documentaries are ones that don't just have one viewpoint, that have multiple viewpoints, even if obviously the viewer or the directors don't agree with all those viewpoints. Actually seeing them to see what they believe I think can be very compelling. But for the right-wing characters in this film, we always sent them the questions in advance so they actually knew exactly what they were going to be talking about, and they always signed the release form after the interview. So they were fully aware of what they said, and they still agreed to be on camera. And I think, again, Abe Foxman, for example, says some deeply racist things, and I don't think he thinks they're racist. I think, and you talk with Israeli settlers, and I've interviewed many Israeli settlers, they are Jewish supremacists. And they believe truly that the entire land is theirs. Doesn't matter if they were born in Chicago, doesn't matter if they were born in New York. This land is theirs, they think, and essentially screw everyone else. And they truly believe it. And so seeing it and seeing them actually say it, I think, is effective. And before I forget as well, if you're interested in this film, this is only our third festival. We're just beginning our festival run. If you're interested in signing up for our mailing list, you can go to Israelismfilm.com. You search Israelism, it'll be the first thing or second thing that comes up. We're going to be doing tons of screenings across the country in the next 6 to 9 months. And then starting in around 9 months, people will be able to organize their own screenings. So Israelismfilm.com if you're interested.
Speaking of that, I believe this is also up for an audience award. So if you like this film, you'll probably get an email saying vote. And if you think this film is important, that is your moral responsibility. This is what you can do for the film, because something like that will really help it through the festival play. I find it just really fascinating that you were able to get the money to make a film like this, because clearly there's a lot of money if you are anti-Palestinian, not a whole lot of money for people in progressive causes, and it's not inexpensive to make a film like this.
That's why it partly took 7 years. So the first couple of years, we mostly funded it by iTutoring, and I just used money that I made tutoring to fund the film for the first couple of years. We eventually did some crowdfunding campaigns, and then, luckily, there are Jewish folks in the country who have been supporting either progressive Jewish orgs or Palestinian orgs for a very long time. So we were eventually able to kind of network and kind of find the kind of Jewish philanthropists and folks that are already supporting Palestinian rights and already supporting progressive Jews. So it was through their support really that we were able to raise the funds for this film. But we weren't able to really raise anything until we had a cut of the film we could really show these people and be like, this is a real thing. We're going to actually do this. It's a real thing. Help us get to the finish line. But yeah, it was not easy.
And do you want to talk about how you start to shape the film like this? Because I'm sure you had thousands of hours of material.
Totally, yeah. So I think we set out to make what we thought would be like a Ken Burns style, like very talking heads, history focused documentary about this relationship between American Jews and the Israel-Palestine conflict, and then kind of just realized that it would be much more compelling to tell it through personal narratives, and found that focus. So it took a really long time. I mean, I think I did an initial rough cut myself because we didn't have money to hire an editor back in like 2018, and then we hired a really fantastic editor, Tony Hale, who was working with us on and off for about over 3 years to edit the film. And yeah, we did so many different drafts and scripting and everything, but yeah.
We wanted to make a film really about how American Jews learn about Israel, and then what happens when they meet Palestinians and come into contact with Palestinians. And eventually we realized the way to do that was to kind of see someone's entire life journey in terms of see Simone and Eitan's life journey of what it's actually like to grow up in a traditional Jewish educational environment. And I went to Hebrew school when I grew up in a similar environment, not exactly like theirs. And then see what happens actually as they come into contact. So that personal arc really became kind of the backbone for the film as a whole.
Absolutely. I think it's so powerful that you start with, looking at the Israeli flag and the American flag. And, I remember as a kid, sitting and looking at the American flag and the Israeli flag and saying, well, which one? And without knowing very much of anything. But the idea, and I think you do this so well in the film, is get a sense for people who aren't Jewish, they grow up that way, how key and core Israel is talked about. Every time you're in Hebrew school, or if you went to a Hebrew day school, it is the center of your life, and everything is about that. And in a sense, it's, as you talk about in the film, it's a response to the Holocaust. There was the Holocaust, the only place where we can feel safe is this. And you can understand that. But it doesn't mean you can do a Holocaust against other people. And I think that's
Yeah, I think, and Sam will talk about this in a second as well, I think, because of the Holocaust and because of the incredible trauma that Jews have gone through, not just in the Holocaust, my dad would always said that, his parents would always say, in 1900, if you asked where a genocide against Jews were going to be, you wouldn't have said Germany, you'd probably say Russia. But there was a couple of places where it could have happened. And Jewish trauma is centuries and centuries long, and my family fled Eastern Europe 100 years ago, fleeing anti-Semitism. But yeah, so I think many Jews, Israeli and American, feel like they need Israel. They need this light at the end of the tunnel. They need this miracle of Jewish history. But again, the narrative we learn, at best leaves out key facts, and at worst is based on the total erasure of Palestinians. And again, Palestinians were not the ones who committed atrocities against Jews historically. It was Europeans. But unfortunately, the Palestinians were the ones who paid the cost in terms of actually losing land.
Yeah. I don't know. How do we can continue?
Well, Jenny, do you have some questions here? I'm sure you do. Hello. Yes.
Just a couple of things. The entire persecution of different cultures in our country is out of control,
Yeah.
in my opinion. I mean, it's not just against Jews, it's against,
Anyway, it's not white.
it's so many different things. And has it gotten worse for you since the Capitol was attacked and things of that nature? Has it been more obvious to you that the persecution has become more widespread? And secondly, is this ever going to end with Palestine and Israel?
Definitely anti-Semitism has gotten worse over the past 5 years or so, and definitely racism in general has gotten worse. So yeah, there's pretty, we showed that a bit in the film, but no question that the rise of the far right and the spreading of all these conspiracy theories is really scary. And
I just emphasize that you make the point really well, that if we spent the money, instead of spending it on Israel fighting anti-Semitism in the United States, that actually might be helpful.
Totally, yeah. And to your other question, I mean, yeah, obviously there's no, I don't think anyone sees a immediate solution right around the corner. Things, if anything, are getting worse and worse for Palestinians with the rise of this extreme, even more extreme right in Israel. That said, I think there's the just, intense mask-off Jewish supremacy of the current government in Israel, and the way it's undermining even democracy such as it exists, which is democracy mostly only for Jewish citizens, is kind of revealing to the world more and more, just how bad things are. And I think and I hope that that's going to change more people's minds and create more international pressure, which is really, really important because, the American government, more than anyone else, really supports Israel's military and prevents it from any accountability at the UN, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. Only thing is that, building off of what actually might happen in Israel-Palestine, unfortunately it's essentially in Israel's court because Israel essentially controls all the land from the river to the sea. And it does not look like they're interested in any way in giving Palestinians their own state. So it's going to take either, international pressure to move the needle, and at least that's all we can really do here. And again, as Sam said, things are changing very rapidly. For the very first time, nonpartisan polling shows that amongst Democrats, at least, a much greater proportion of Democrats sympathize with the Palestinians as opposed to sympathize with the Israelis. So historically, it was essentially a bipartisan issue. Both Democrats and Republicans essentially supported Israel unconditionally. For the first time, at least amongst Democratic voters, about 50% basically sympathize with the Palestinians more than the Israelis. I think it's like 30% or so, you should look it up. sympathize with Israelis more, and then like 20% are undecided, roughly. And amongst American Jews, it's also changing very rapidly. Amongst all American Jews, polling now shows 25% of all American Jews consider Israel's policies tantamount to apartheid. If you look at Jews under 40, so young Jews, 38% consider Israel's policies to be tantamount to apartheid. If you have 38%, that probably means at least the majority realize something is wrong, whether or not they're ready to use the word apartheid or not. That's a huge number. I mean, those numbers would have been unthinkable 10 years ago. So again, we have no control over what Israel does, but we can change public opinion in America, and it is changing very, very quickly.
And I think in the film you make the point that American
Jews really make a point that would change the needle dramatically. And if we say the obvious, a film like this shown to
Jews who
actually come and
see it could
make a big difference.
We hope so, certainly, and that's why we're planning a very wide screening tour, including in synagogues and JCCs and other Jewish spaces all around the country, and college campuses, starting in the fall. So we're very excited.
And we just got into our first Jewish festival. It's one of the biggest Jewish festivals in the country, and we're planning on bringing it to many, 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 many Jewish spaces, especially starting in the fall when we start a national tour. So we're still very early in the film's lifetime right now, but that's the goal of the film, and it's going to be our lives for the next couple of years, hopefully.
You'll travel the world.
At least America, at least America. But no, we'll also do screenings in Israel, Palestine, starting in the winter, probably.
Yes, back there, you had your hand up. Yes, you.
Hi, Eric and Sam, I'm Nancy Capstan. And I tried to promote this film. I'm very glad to have seen it, and I would love for others to see it, and I would love for the Jewish community to see it. At the same time, I think that as Americans, and especially as Texans right now, we should be recognizing that this issue of religious nationalism and white supremacism is not just an issue in Israel, it's an issue here in our country, in our state, and there's a lot going on right now in Austin that's really, really concerning. So, I think that part of our, and in terms of separating out anti-Semitism from anti-State of Israel policyism, I think it's important to remember that that our religion is based on the land, right? Like, that does not validate colonialism in any way, shape, or form, but this whole idea of nationalism in general postdates Jewish tradition, postdates Judaism. The reason that we have such a screwy calendar and nobody can ever figure out when the Jewish holidays are is because our holidays are linked to what the seasons are in the land of Israel. And I think that it's really important for the Jewish community to remember that and teach that and identify with that connection to the land that's independent of a nation. And I also think it's important for us to recognize that these nationalistic interests and these tribal interests are really undermining peace, security, and thriving, and our religious obligations for all of us, whether we're Jews, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindu, whoever we are, Americans. They are really undermining our values.
Thank you, Nancy. No, thank you so much for your work. Thank you for helping with this. I really deeply appreciate it. And I agree with everything you're saying, especially in terms of America. I mean, everything that Israel has done, America has done worse. And that's important to note. And that is true. I mean, America, again, successfully colonized an entire continent, ethnically cleansed almost an entire continent, and enslaved people for hundreds and hundreds of years. So again, just because I criticize Israel does not mean I don't criticize America. Again, America has done worse. And again, I'm still an American. I try to make it better. But I think that's absolutely true. And I think you are right in terms of our connection to the land as well. And again, it is a beautiful connection. Again, it is true. Again, we do come from that land historically. Jews have always lived in that land. For the past 2,000 years, it was primarily small numbers in Jerusalem and Sfat and other religious communities. But we do have a beautiful connection to that land. And I do firmly believe that Jews should be able to live in that land, of course. I just don't think that how it was actually done in terms of creating a Jewish-only state that subjugates Palestinians is not acceptable, of course. And you're right. I mean, things are getting worse in America, and nationalism, is getting worse. And again, I am a queer Jewish person, and I thought I'd be safe in America, and I hope that I will get to live my life safely in America. But I'm trans, and I can't be safe in large parts of the country, and it's sad. So it definitely is. It's not just an Israel issue. It's definitely a worldwide issue.
Yeah, and I think there's this weird thing that's happened with white nationalists in America where they actually might not like Jews in America, but they really admire Israel because they want America to be Israel but for white Christians. And that's the vision that frankly is happening in this country with these anti-trans, anti-women, and anti-wokeness, quote unquote, bills, in my opinion, is we're seeing the fruition of this sort of extreme Christian nationalism in the same way, in a lot of ways that in Israel we have this extreme Jewish nationalism. So yeah, scary times for everyone.
Yes.
My question is about the animation. Who did your animation? Because the style you did and the color palette was very impactful. So I was wondering who did that for you.
Oh yeah, thank you. It was an awesome animation studio called Supernova Design. They do really, really great work. It took a very long time. It took a number of months, or probably 6 months, I feel like, by the time we were done with it. So it was a long process, but they did an amazing job.
And I really think it helps tell the story well for things that you couldn't obviously.
Right, yeah, it's not like we have footage of those exact things.
Right.
So we
Can't shoot those military things. We have time for one more question, and you get it.
Okay. So, clearly there has been many atrocities against the Palestinians. We can all blame sort of whose fault, but how much does the Arab nations count in this? How much does the Palestinian government? Because, when you have this issue of this treatment, which is awful, but at the same time you have governments which want to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. How do you reconcile, how do you separate the plight of the people with the responsibility of the government? Because again, it would be a very interesting conversation if those governments would come out and say, Israel has a right to live, let's all live in peace, and then to see how Israel would react. But how do you reconcile, sort of ultimately, whose responsibility is it? Because it's not going to be solved easily without government having at least a particular word, let Israel survive.
Yeah, so there's a couple questions there. And I guess I'll start with the point about Palestinian governments, essentially, and kind of the role of Palestinian governments. There essentially is no Palestinian government. So there's a couple of different governmental entities. There's something called the Palestinian Authority, and then there's Hamas in Gaza. The Palestinian Authority essentially has no power. So there's a Palestinian president. If I was a 18-year-old Israeli soldier, I could arrest the Palestinian president. I could go into the Palestinian president's home and detain him for as long as I wanted to. When it comes to Hamas, again, Hamas is an organization that militarily took over Gaza after a parliamentary election was had. They actually won the elections, and then Israel, the Palestinian Authority, and America said those elections do not count, essentially, discredited those elections. There was essentially a civil war, and Hamas took over. And again, Hamas does try to kill Israeli civilians. They do that successfully sometimes, but the number of Palestinian civilians killed is always an order of magnitude greater than the number of Palestinians killed. And I think, again, the talking point of, well, they want to wipe Israel off the face of the map. Israel has wiped Palestine off the map. So I think we often think about the fact that, they want to kill Israel, right? Well, the Israelis actually have successfully, wiped Palestine off the map. Palestine was a region in a variety of empires, and Israel successfully took over that entire land. So when we talk about, again, they're going to wipe us off the map, that's a fear, and that's a hypothetical thing. But if we actually look at what's actually happened, the opposite has actually happened. Israel has actually very successfully taken over the entire land and colonized the entire land very successfully. And when we come to, again, the fact that it's a complicated conflict, yes, it is a complicated conflict. But there's a general pattern as well. And that pattern is, right, that Jewish refugees and colonists, right, they were both refugees, they had few places to go, but they also were colonists, and they used the language of colonization, and they saw themselves as colonists, and they decided to take over militarily another place. And they did, and they took over that land. And so when you do that, the idea of expecting the people who live there to act peacefully and to just take it, I think is not realistic. And I think if someone decided to take over Texas and just said, well, we lived here a long time ago and this is going to be our home now, I'm guessing you probably wouldn't deal with it very well. When it comes to the surrounding Arab states, there are many surrounding Arab countries. And again, our film is not actually about them, of course. Most actually at this point have peaceful relations with Israel. Many Palestinians do not like that, obviously. And I certainly do not actually defend how those surrounding Arab countries have treated the Palestinians. Many of the surrounding Arab countries have treated the Palestinians very, very poorly. So again, I think it is a complicated issue. For example, the UAE, Saudi Arabia is in talks with Israel now. Israel has a peace has a peace treaty with Egypt. It has a peace treaty with Jordan. So it actually does have pretty good relations with most of its neighbors. Not all its neighbors. Again, there's still obviously conflict with Syria, there's to a certain extent conflict with Lebanon, and then Iran. But again, it does have peaceful relations with most of its neighbors, but it's still taking land. It's still trying to take Palestinian land. And what's important to note as well is that no matter whether it's a right-wing government or a left-wing government, since 1967, the project of colonization in the West Bank has been linear. Right? Settlements have increased at essentially the same rate the entire time. So it's a complicated issue, but at the same time, I do think that, again, Israel ultimately is the ultimate aggressor in that they decided to take this land. They have taken this land, and it's been a continual process the entire time.
I think this is a long and discussion, and they probably want to do another film in this theater, and we can talk about this out in the lobby, because I'm sure that we have a lively discussion. We're not going to solve this, but my hope is that you all understand the story differently, and you understand the life and the world that the Palestinians have to go through, and maybe you will understand why they're so angry. And maybe if they weren't abused, maybe they wouldn't want to kill everybody else. Just maybe. Thank you for making this film and bringing it to us.
Thank you so much.
And we wish you great luck on your festival run. And please vote for it.
And go to Israelismfilm.com, sign up for a mailing list. It really means a lot. Again, there'll be a lot more dates coming soon, and you'll be able to schedule your own screenings. So thank you so much again.